Greetings friends, I hope this video finds you well. The last couple of days I've been working on making some acoustic panels that are going to go on these walls here. I have pretty good acoustics down here. It's a carpeted floor, but I do get some echo because most of the walls are bare and the hard ceiling. So it's not terrible, but I thought I wanted to make some anyway and see what it was like. I watched a bunch of videos and wanted to try my hand at it, so that's what I've been doing the last couple of days, and I hope you enjoy. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them below. So the panels are going to go right here on this wall, so I have 4 of them. They're going to go above the PCs, and we'll see if it helps with the acoustics.
Here's the filling that I used for the acoustic panels. It's a Owens Corning mineral wool. It's a 3.5 inches thick. The frames are made out of 1x4s, which dimensionally are also about 3.5 inches thick. Here's the screws that I used for the brackets, 3/4 inch. Here are the brackets themselves. So this is just to strengthen the corners, to keep the boards from moving and warping and give them some rigidity. Here's the backing material. So it's just a very thin, very cheap backing material to keep the filling inside the panels. Here's the fabric itself. I went with 4 different fabrics because there wasn't enough material to do all 4 for any of these that I liked, so I just decided to go ahead and make them all different. And I believe this is all like 100% cotton, and it was purchased at a local big box store, big box like fabric supply craft store. And you can see here it's pretty thin, so it should let the sound travel through. And here I'm just opening up the mineral wool just to show you how much it expands and what it looks like before I put it into the panels. So I made my frame 16 1/4 by 46 3/4. The bats themselves were 16 1/2 by about 47. So this 1/4 inch or so let them fit snugly and would prevent them from moving around inside the frame. So here I'm using my miter saw to go ahead and cut the frames out of the 1x4s. And I did one of them initially in the beginning just to make sure everything was going to fit the way I wanted it before I made the other 3. Next, I just took a sanding block and smoothed out the rough edges after they were cut from the saw. And here I'm laying out the frame on the ground. I didn't use the folding table because it had like a hump in the middle of it, which made it very difficult to lay these out flat. So just used the concrete floor in the garage, and then I have my framing square and my brad nailer with 2-inch brad nails. I went ahead and tacked each corner with a couple of brad nails just to get this kind of lined up and make sure it was where I wanted it before I went ahead and put the metal brackets and screws in. And now I'm ready for the metal brackets and the screws, just to reinforce all of these corners and keep the wood from warping or wanting to twist at all while it's hanging on the wall. So these brackets had a little bit longer end on one side and a little bit shorter end on the other. So I used that on the long side of the frame. And then it also got 4 screws per bracket as well. Here I'm using a tape measure to check the square of each of the frame. So you want each corner to corner measurement to be the same. That way you know it's square. If it's not, you may need to adjust a little bit and then check it again. And now I'm test fitting the bats just to make sure they fit in the frame correctly, they're snug, and it's going to work well before I put the fabric on. So the next step is to use the backing fabric. This will go on first, and then it'll hold the insulation in when I put the finished fabric on the other side. So I'm just using a staple gun and some staples, and I'm just trimming it off and just nailing it right to the edge of the frame. On this one I was nailing it directly to the back of the edge, and on the next set, when I did all 3 together, I was just nailing it to the side because the finished fabric was going to cover that anyway, so it didn't really matter. And then you'll see in my as I'm nailing here, I had to use a hammer because some of these staples didn't go in all the way. I don't know if it's just something with my gun or the wood or where I was hitting with the staples. I just wanted to make sure they were completely flat so that I wouldn't tear the fabric or pull the staple out as I was putting the finished fabric over on the other side. So I'm just using some 3/8 inch staples, and you can see I'm adjusting the staple gun here just to make sure that they're going in as far as possible. And then I'm also using a hammer to make sure they're completely flat as I staple this down to the edge. And on this first one, I was kind of folding over the fabric just to give the staples more fabric to kind of staple through and maybe make it stronger. But and when I did the other 3, I didn't do this. I just wrapped it around and stapled it right into the edge of the board. Wasn't really necessary. And here you can see where I'm just folding it over and using the edge of the board, and then coming back with a hammer just to make sure all the staples went in completely and they're all the way flat. Now that the backing is on, I'm just test fitting to make sure that the insulation fits in there correctly, and then getting ready to put the finished fabric on the front side.
Pick up the phone.
So here I'm just laying the finished fabric down, lining it up, make sure that it lines up and it's going to lay out where I want it, and that I have a clean line down the edges and across the top. And then I'm just going to fold it over and then continue to staple, and then come back and just trim it up with some scissors.
Pick up the phone.
putting a staple about every 3 or 4 inches just so that the fabric doesn't stretch and distort as I'm stapling it on the other sides.
Pick up the phone.
Once I got one of the long sides done, I would flip it around and stretch the fabric over. Again, making sure I lined it up and that the pattern wasn't distorted. I wasn't pulling too much in any one spot, and then just continue to staple. It was easier to do the long sides first and then finish off with the shorter ends. So for the shorter sides, I started by stapling in the middle and then working my way to the corner. And then as I finished it up, I would kind of fold over the corner and wrap it almost like a Christmas present. If you've ever done wrapped a Christmas present and you fold over the corners. These can be pretty tricky, so you can see I kind of played with it for a few minutes before I figured out exactly how I wanted to do it. And this ended up looking the best. And because I did the long sides first and the short sides at the end, this allowed that crease, if you will, the very short crease in the triangle pattern to be on the short sides, which are going to be on the top and the bottom of the panel, and you're less likely to see them being there. Once I had everything stapled, I just came back and trimmed and left about 1 inch to 1.5 inches all the way around. And just trimming off all of the excess fabric from all the sides. So here's a close-up of what the ends look like with the present style wrapping, and then the overall finished panel on the front. So I decided to use these D-ring hangers. They're like a little hook with a screw that screw into the back of the panels, and then this picture wire which holds up to 30 pounds. And you can see here I'm going to mount them. I measured 4 inches down on each side, and then screwed one of the brackets into each of the sides of the panel. Just a single screw, and then once that was screwed in, I tied the wire on one side, stretched it directly across, and then just made it as tight as I could, and then tied it to the other side. And then I finished that up with a little piece of electrical tape just to hold it and keep it from unraveling, and also to keep it from possibly scratching the wall if that wire were to stick out at any point. And here's a close-up of what that assembly looks like. So with the D-rings on each side, the wire stretching across, and then just finishing it off with a little bit of electrical tape to hold it all together. So now it's back to the miter saw, and I'm just going to go ahead and cut out all of the remaining pieces for the other 3 frames, just so that I can build them all at the same time. Now I'm just going to lay out the remaining 3 frames and go ahead and tack them up with the brad nailer, making sure they're square with the framing square, and then get ready to put in the brackets and the screws. So I've stood up all 3 frames right next to each other. This just allows me to put the brackets and the screws in all at the same time and be more efficient. Then I can flip them over and do the other side. And then I check square on each one before I put the backing fabric on, and then I put it back on the ground, adjust it if necessary, just to make sure it's as close as possible before I put the fabric on. And from here, it's just rinse and repeat for each of the 3 frames. So backing fabric, put the insulation inside, and then flip it over and put the finished fabric on, and then trim it all up and put the hanging hardware on. I will mention the rainbow fabric was a little more challenging because it had very, very straight lines, so I had to pay a little bit more attention and spend a little bit more time to line it up to make sure that it didn't look weird when I stretched it over. I decided to put these little plastic bumpers on the corners of the back of the panels just to stand them off from the wall a little bit so that they wouldn't scratch it up or be too close. Here I'm using my glue gun, so I have a cordless glue gun and I'm using some Gorilla Glue glue sticks to glue down the edges of the fabric on the back of the panels. This probably wasn't required, but I just wanted to make sure that these didn't come loose and the staples didn't work themselves out, or the fabric become loose and stretchy over time. So I just went ahead and put glue on all the corners and along all the edges of the fabric just to glue it down and just kind of to tie it all together. Again, probably overkill, but I figured, you know, what the heck, go ahead and do it just to make sure none of this stuff comes apart, and we'll see how it holds up. I also put just a little dab of glue under each of these before I hammered them all the way in, just so that they wouldn't back out and move or come out at a later time. I did reuse these from some chair legs that they used to be on, so the nails weren't exactly the strongest, and the plastic was bent a little bit in some cases, so this would just ensure that these wouldn't come off. So that's one panel down, and now I'm just going to repeat that process 3 more times. Here's a close-up of all 4 finished panels before I got ready to hang them on the wall.
Here's what I'm going to use to hang the panels with. These are rated for 40 pounds, and this is what they look like. So they just push right into the drywall. And these work better than like a nail or a screw because it goes all the way through the drywall in 2 places, and it uses gravity to help hang it in place. So if you put a nail on here, it could pull out, or use a nail rather, it could pull out, or if you wanted to use a wall anchor or a screw, that would probably work, but it's going to leave a pretty big hole. Or you could definitely try to put it on a stud, but in my case, not all of these are going to line up over a stud where I want them, so this is the best thing. Here is a test of the current acoustics, so we'll see if we can see a difference once the panels are on the walls. So I've got the panels hung up now. They're in no particular spacing. I just put them where I thought they would fit the best. Now we're going to do another sound test to see if there is any improvement over the previous, so before I put the panels up. So sounds a little bit better to me. There's still definitely some echo. So there's a whole another wall over here to my right, as well as behind the camera, and of course the ceiling that has no acoustic treatment, and the corners don't have any acoustic treatment. So I think eventually I'm going to make some more panels for the other walls, maybe another 7 or 8, maybe some different sizes, maybe some that are a little bit shorter than these or wider, not sure yet. And then also I want to try making some bass traps for the corners. Hopefully you enjoyed this and you learned something, and if you're thinking about making your own panels, or if you have any suggestions, please leave them below, and I would greatly appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. Thank you.